Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I always believed I knew Adeline better than anyone else. After all, we had been married for 5 years. 5 years of shared jokes that no one else understood, of navigating financial challenges together, of planning a future that felt as solid and real as the oak table in our kitchen. I remembered the day I proposed on the windswept cliffs of Big Sur, the way the setting sun caught the fire in her eyes as she whispered yes. Her voice, then, was full of a breathtaking certainty, a certainty I thought was reserved for me. It seemed like we had everything under control, a comfortable life built on a foundation of mutual trust and quiet understanding. But that night, sitting at that same oak table, the distant murmur of a late-night talk show filling the silence, Adeline said something that shattered my world. She said it with the same casual tone someone might use to comment on the weather, or to suggest a new restaurant they wanted to try. She looked at her slice of sourdough bread, not at me, and said, "On Friday, I'm going out with a coworker. For dinner." Pause. Just that. I blinked a few times, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to add some detail that would clarify the sheer absurdity of what I had just heard. "His wife will be there too," or, "It's a big group thing from the office." But Adeline just picked up the butter knife, spread a thin, perfect layer across the bread, and took a bite as if she had just declared the most mundane fact in the world. I needed a moment to let the words rearrange themselves in my head into something that made sense. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe this was some bizarre, new kind of humor she was testing on me, a terrible, unfunny joke. But the way she kept her eyes fixed on her plate, the deliberate avoidance of my gaze, it filled me with a cold, creeping dread. "What?" The word came out of me, but it sounded distant, calmer than any man in my position had a right to sound. Adeline finally looked up, and for the first time, I saw something else in her eyes. It wasn't the warmth I knew. It was something calculated, as if she had rehearsed this moment, anticipated my every possible reaction, and was waiting for me to fall into her carefully laid trap. "It's just dinner, Julian," she said, her voice carrying an unsettling lightness. "This doesn't change anything between us. I love you, and none of this will affect our marriage." I kept my eyes on her, searching for a crack in that cool, polished facade. But Adeline seemed completely at ease, as if she were utterly convinced that this was a normal, healthy, and perfectly acceptable thing to announce to her husband. My fork, which had been halfway to my mouth, remained suspended in the air. My appetite had vanished, replaced by a hollow pit in my stomach. My heart was pounding against my ribs, like a trapped bird, a frantic, desperate rhythm. But I wouldn't show it. I would not give her that power. It was clear what she expected. She thought I would fall apart. She was waiting for the explosion, for me to raise my voice, to slam my fist on the table, to fire off a barrage of indignant questions, to give her an ultimatum. That's what she wanted. A reaction. A big, messy, emotional reaction that she could then manage, control, and use to her advantage. But I was different. And if there was one thing life had taught me, it was how to control my emotions when it mattered most. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the air fill my lungs, and then released it just as slowly. In that single, controlled exhalation, I made my decision. If this was a game, I wasn't going to lose. So, to Adeline's visible surprise, I let the corner of my mouth lift into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. "I see," I said, my voice now tinged with an air of disinterest. I picked up my glass of water and took a long, slow sip, my eyes never leaving hers. Her breathing hitched. It was a tiny, almost unnoticeable falter, but I saw it, and that was enough. It was all the confirmation I needed. She didn't want my permission. She wanted a fight. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like hammer blows. Adeline tried to hide her confusion by lowering her gaze back to her food, but I continued to watch her with a deliberate, unnerving patience. "Well," I continued, my tone now shifting to something almost casual, "maybe I should go out with someone too, just to see what it's like." That did it. That was when Adeline finally looked at me, really looked at me, not with that rehearsed calmness from before, but with something new. Something raw. Uncertainty. I couldn't hide the flicker of satisfaction I felt as I saw the slight tremor in her hand as she held her fork. She blinked a few times, as if her brain was struggling to process the words I had just spoken. She did not expect this. She had run through all the scenarios in her head, all the ways I might break, but she had never once considered the possibility that I might simply agree and play the game better than her. "Did you meet someone?" she asked, trying desperately to cloak her question in a veil of indifference, but failing miserably. I kept that faint smile on my face and shrugged, a picture of nonchalance. "There's a woman at the gym. Delilah." I said the name as if it were an afterthought. "We talk a lot. I think it would be interesting to go out one of these days." It was at that moment that I saw the color drain from Adeline's face. The cards had just been reshuffled, and I hadn't even started playing my hand yet. The silence that followed was deafening. Adeline's confident mask didn't just slip, it shattered for a brief second. I saw the fork she was holding hover motionless over her plate, her hand frozen in place. Her eyes, which moments before were filled with a smug certainty, were now slightly wide, her mind racing to catch up with this unexpected turn of events. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, projecting an aura of complete ease, as if this entire conversation carried no more weight for me than deciding what to watch on TV. But inside, a strange and calculated pleasure was blooming. The pleasure of seeing Adeline experience the very same vertigo, the same gut-wrenching uncertainty that she had tried to inflict on me just minutes before. "Oh," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I see." She tried to regain her composure, looking away, pushing a piece of lettuce around her plate with her fork. I noticed the subtle, agitated bounce of her leg under the table, a nervous tic she was trying to hide. I knew her so well enough to know that she was nowhere near as comfortable as she was pretending to be. So why did she suddenly seem so anxious? If she truly believed that going out with someone else was a normal, modern evolution of our relationship, why was she so obviously shaken to hear that I might do the same? The answer was clear. This was never about freedom or exploration. It was a test of her power over me. And now, that test had backfired spectacularly. So I pressed my advantage, keeping my tone light and inquisitive. "Is there a problem with that?" She forced a short, brittle laugh and shook her head, a little too quickly. "Of course not. I didn't expect that from you." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny," I said, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. "Because I didn't expect that from you." This time, Adeline didn't laugh. My words landed like stones, and the forced lightness she had maintained until then finally began to crumble. She tried to recover, raising her chin in a gesture of defiance, but her eyes betrayed her. "So, who is this woman? This Delilah?" I had to smile to myself. I knew that question was coming. And the most interesting part was that she wasn't even trying to hide her sudden, desperate interest. Just moments ago, she had been espousing this grand idea of an open, modern relationship, something we could explore without fear or jealousy. Now, the mere mention of another woman's name had put her on the highest possible alert. "I'm not sure it matters much," I replied, picking up my napkin and dabbing the corners of my mouth with deliberate slowness. "If, as you say, it doesn't change anything between us, then I don't see any reason to discuss the details." I had used her own words against her. The logic was inescapable. Adeline let out a short, nasal sound that was supposed to be a laugh but came out more like a scoff. The tension in her jaw was obvious. "So, it's real? You're really going to go out with this woman?" I tilted my head slightly, studying her, as if she were a puzzle I was trying to solve. "You're the one who said you wanted us to explore this, right? Together?" She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time that night, for the first time in a very long time, Adeline was speechless. The confidence she had walked into this game with was evaporating before my very eyes. What was supposed to be a simple exercise to measure how much power she still had over me was spiraling into something completely different. I didn't need anything more at that moment. I already had what I wanted. The certainty that Adeline had never, for a single second, expected me to accept her plan. And more importantly, the certainty that deep down, she knew she was about to lose something she had never imagined could slip through her fingers. Without another word, I picked up my glass, drained the last sip of water, and stood up from the table. "Good night, Adeline." She just sat there, watching me leave the kitchen with a distant, stunned look on her face. And in that instant, I knew the cards hadn't just changed. I was already in control of the game. In the days that followed, the very air in our house seemed to change. The space, once filled with casual conversations and the predictable rhythms of our life together, was now charged with a heavy, unspoken tension. The silences spoke louder than words ever could. I continued with my usual activities, making a conscious effort to show no sign that I had been shaken by what happened that night. I went to work, came home at the same time, went to the gym, but now, I felt lighter. The shock and hurt had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. That was when Adeline began to realize what was really going on. At first, I could tell she was convincing herself this was just a phase, an act. She believed I was pretending to be indifferent so that she would back down, so she would come to me and say it was all a silly mistake. But I didn't back down. On the contrary, I started acting even more unpredictably. The first time I saw genuine discomfort flicker across her face was on Wednesday morning. I was standing in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting the collar of my shirt. It was something I did every day, but this time was different. I took a little more care. I ran a hand through my hair, checking my reflection from a different angle. Then, I picked up my phone, looked at the screen, and smiled. A small, private smile. Adeline was at the kitchen counter, sipping her coffee, and I saw her reflection in the mirror. She froze. Her heart, I imagined, must have skipped a beat, and for the first time, I believe she felt something she had never truly felt for me before. The fear of losing me. She tried to hide her discomfort, but that image, that simple smile at my phone, replayed in her mind all day. I could see it in the way she looked at me that evening. While we were on the couch, pretending to watch a movie, she made a casual comment. "You seem a lot more excited lately." Without taking my eyes off the screen, I just gave that same small smile. She shifted on the couch, crossing her legs. "Yeah," she pressed, trying to sound casual. "Almost like you're busier." This time, I turned to look at her. I didn't respond immediately. My gaze was analytical, as if I were weighing the intentions behind her words. Then, with a careful, measured calm, I said, "Yeah, I guess I'm just using my time more efficiently." The way I said it, the cool detachment in my voice, sent a visible chill down her spine. In the days that followed, she began watching me in ways she never had before. She became an observer in her own home. She noticed the increased frequency of message notifications on my phone. She noticed that I sometimes went for my morning runs earlier than usual. One day, I came home from work and went straight to the shower, whistling a tune she didn't recognize. Every little action was a piece of evidence. And in her mind, it was all adding up to her worst fears being confirmed. Then came Friday. The same Friday she had planned to go out with her coworker. As I was pouring myself a cup of coffee during breakfast, I casually mentioned, "I'm going out tonight." Adeline's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. "Oh, really?" she tried, and failed, to sound indifferent. I nodded, taking a sip from my mug. "Yeah, is it with that woman? From the gym?" The name Delilah seemed to get caught in her throat. I looked at her over the rim of my mug, my expression neutral, and I simply smiled. Adeline felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. I saw it in her eyes. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her mind was spinning, trying to find a logical answer, a way to change the direction of this runaway train. But there was no other direction. I had accepted the rules of the game she herself had started. And now, for the first time, Adeline wasn't sure if she was ready to play. That night, Adeline stayed home. Alone. I left without rushing. I wore a new shirt she didn't remember me ever buying. My cologne, a scent she liked but I rarely wore, lingered in the hallway long after I was gone. I didn't offer any details about where I was going. I didn't ask where she was going. And above all, I didn't seem the least bit concerned that she supposedly also had a date. That was when the truth must have hit her like a crushing weight. She didn't go out. I knew she wouldn't. Her coworker, the supposed dinner date, probably sent messages asking if their plans were still on. I could picture her staring at the phone, unable to reply. How could she? Her mind was elsewhere, completely consumed by thoughts of me, of where I was, of who I was with. I didn't go to meet Delilah. There was no Delilah. There was only a concept, a ghost I had created to hold a mirror up to Adeline's actions. Instead, I drove. I drove up the coast with the windows down, letting the cool night air whip through the car. I found a quiet, dimly lit bar overlooking the ocean, a place I had never been before. I ordered a glass of whiskey, sat at a table in the corner, and just thought. I thought about our 5 years together. about the good times and the quiet erosion of trust that I had failed to see. I thought about her test, and what it said about her view of me, of us. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a power play. She had grown so comfortable, so certain of my devotion, that she felt she could risk it all just to feel a thrill, to reaffirm her control. She had gambled with our marriage, and she had lost. As I sat there, watching the waves crash against the shore in the darkness, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a profound and heavy sadness. A sadness for the man I used to be, the man who would have begged her not to go, the man who would have fallen apart, just as she had expected. But that man was gone. She had killed him. I spent hours there. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about what she was doing. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was pacing. She was trying to convince herself that none of this mattered. But with every passing minute, the suffocating feeling inside her would only grow. She would be opening and closing apps for no reason, just looking for a distraction. But deep down, she would only be doing one thing: waiting. Waiting for me to send a message. Waiting for me to come home early. Waiting for me to admit that this was all just a ridiculous provocation. But I didn't come home early. I didn't send any messages. I didn't show any sign of regret. That was when real despair would set in for her. I pictured her on the couch, the TV on some random show, her eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for the familiar sound of my keys in the lock. When I finally walked in, it was already past 3 a.m. I entered quietly. There was no hurry, no guilt in my steps. I didn't expect her to be awake, but a single lamp was on, casting long shadows across the living room. She was there, on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. And in that moment, as our eyes met across the dimly lit room, I could feel that something inside her had irrevocably broken. How was it? Her voice came out as a weak, trembling whisper. I took off my coat, hung it on the back of a chair, and looked at her with the same neutral, unreadable expression I had worn for the past few days. It was good, I said. The simple, direct response cut through her like a cold blade. I saw panic flood her eyes. She wanted to ask more questions. She wanted details. She wanted me to say it was all a mistake, that it meant nothing, but she couldn't say any of that, because I showed no remorse. I wasn't trying to hide anything, and perhaps that was the worst part of all. I had simply played by her rules. I walked through the living room and disappeared down the hall toward our bedroom, as if the conversation was already over. Adeline stayed where she was, paralyzed, her heart beating so loudly she could probably hear it in her ears. She had wanted to play a game with me. She had wanted to test me. She wanted to see me uncertain. But now, she was the one silently begging for all of this to just be a game. Only this time, I wasn't playing anymore. The next morning, Adeline woke up with a feeling I'm sure she had never experienced before in her life. Real, uncontrollable fear. The fear that I was no longer the same man she knew. The fear that this time, she had crossed a line from which there was no return. I was already in the kitchen when she came out. I was drinking coffee, scrolling through the news on my phone, as if it were any other Saturday morning. Seeing me so calm, so distant, made her stomach churn. I could see it in the way she hesitated at the doorway. It was like looking at a stranger in her own home. I didn't say anything when she walked in. I didn't even look up from my phone. I just kept scrolling, occasionally taking a sip from my mug. The silence was thick with everything that had happened. She cleared her throat, trying to loosen the knot that had surely formed there. "You got home late," she said, her voice strained as she tried to make it sound like a casual observation. I didn't show any particular reaction. "Yeah," I answered simply, my eyes still on the screen. That indifferent tone, that single, dismissive word, made her even more uneasy. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me at the table. She was searching my face, my eyes, looking for some flicker of hesitation, some sign that this was still just a game. But I wasn't pretending. This wasn't a mask. The game had served its purpose. It had revealed a truth about our marriage that I could no longer ignore. I truly was distant. The emotional cord that had tied me to her had been severed, and that scared her in a way she never imagined possible. "Julian," she began, and her voice trembled. She hated the vulnerability that escaped, I could tell, but she couldn't help it. "What are we doing here?" I finally looked up at her then. I put my phone down on the table, face down. I studied her for a few seconds, as if deciding whether it was even worth answering that question. Then, with a calmness that made her skin crawl, I said. You tell me. After all, this was your idea, wasn't it? Her stomach dropped. I saw it happen. I never thought you would take this so seriously. I laughed then. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was a hollow, bitter sound. The laugh of someone who was finally, painfully, seeing things with perfect clarity. And what did you expect, Adeline? That I would beg you to change your mind? That I would get on my knees and plead with you to respect our marriage? She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't wait. I've spent the last few days thinking about this, I continued, my voice steady and cold. Thinking about what it means for you to suggest something like this. Thinking about what it says about us, about what it says about you. Her chest tightened. I could see the panic rising in her eyes. Julian, you made a mistake. You didn't blink. Yes, you did. The silence stretched again, painfully. She wanted to scream that, yes, it was all a mistake, that she should never have had such a crazy, destructive idea. But deep down, I think she knew it was useless. I had already made my decision. I stood up, took my mug to the sink, and calmly rinsed it out, the sound of the running water filling the tense silence. It was just a simple, mundane part of a morning routine, but in that moment, it felt final. Then I turned to face her, leaning back against the counter, and with a cold, clear look in my eyes, I said the words that would take her breath away. Thank you, Adeline, for showing me who you really are. And with that, I walked out of the kitchen without a moment's hesitation. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, but it wasn't from regret, it was from resolve. She sat there, paralyzed, as a growing sense of anguish spread through her chest. I could feel it from the other room. A few minutes later, when she finally gathered the courage to walk to the bedroom, she found me by the closet, and she found the stack of papers on the bedside table, the divorce petition. Already signed by me. Adeline's world collapsed all at once. She had wanted to test me. She had wanted to see how far I would go, but in the end, she was the one who lost everything. She was leaning against the bedroom doorframe, her face pale, watching as I took my suitcase out of the closet. The sound of the zipper opening echoed in the heavy silence, a sound that confirmed this was the end. But driven by a final, desperate surge of desperation, she took a step forward, trying to hold on to any last remnant of control. Julian, please. Her voice trembled, and she forced a smile that looked more like a pained grimace. This has gone too far. I forgive you for going out with that woman from the gym. Let's forget all of this. If you forget what I said about going out with my coworker, I'll forget what you did. We can start over. I paused for a second, my hand gripping the handle of the suitcase. I looked at Adeline, and in her eyes, I saw fear. But it wasn't the fear of losing me out of love. It was the raw, primal fear of losing control. Her offer of forgiveness was the most arrogant, most telling thing she could have possibly said. Even now, she saw herself as the one with the power to grant absolution. I let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking my head slowly. I don't need your forgiveness, Adeline. I closed the suitcase, the click of the latches sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I grabbed my keys from the dresser. You taught me something valuable these past few days, I said, walking towards the door, towards her. She didn't move. She just stood there, a statue of regret. And now I know, I deserve more than this. I walked past her, out of the bedroom, and didn't look back. The sound of the front door's deadbolt clicking into place was the last thing Adeline heard before the silence became unbearable. Driving away from the house we had built into a home, I didn't feel the triumph I thought I might. There was no surge of victory, no satisfaction of revenge. There was just a vast, quiet emptiness. The game was over. I had won, but the prize was the ruins of my marriage. The silence in my car was different from the silence I had left behind. Her silence was a vacuum, a void left by the absence of control, filled with panic and regret. My silence was peaceful. It was the silence of a decision made, the silence of a future that was now a blank page, terrifying and liberating all at once. I checked into a sterile, anonymous hotel room downtown. As I stood looking out the window at the city lights, I replayed the week in my head. I saw Adeline's confident smirk, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the final, shattering realization on her face. I hadn't set out to destroy our marriage. I had set out to save my own self-respect. She had presented me with a choice. Be the weak, predictable husband she could control, or be someone she couldn't recognize. I chose the latter. I realized her test wasn't a sudden whim. It was the culmination of years of small manipulations, of tiny power plays that I had ignored or placated for the sake of peace. She hadn't been testing my love for her. She had been testing the limits of my complacency. And she had finally found them. The ghost of Delilah, the woman from the gym, had served her purpose. She was the catalyst, the mirror that showed Adeline not my infidelity, but her own insecurity. Adeline wasn't afraid of another woman. She was afraid of a version of me that she couldn't predict, a Julian who didn't need her approval to feel whole. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and paperwork. We communicated only through text messages, our exchanges brief and transactional. All the warmth, the history, the 5 years of shared life had been reduced to logistics. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. As I unpacked my boxes, I felt the weight of the past slowly begin to lift. The silence in my new home was not the suffocating silence of our final days together. It was a clean slate. It was the sound of my own thoughts, my own music, my own life beginning again. I never asked Adeline what happened with her coworker. It didn't matter. The game she started wasn't about him, and the way I ended it wasn't about Delilah. It was about the fundamental truth that she had forced me to see. A relationship built on tests is not a relationship at all. It's a cage, and for the first time in a very long time, I was free. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. It was the sound of a new beginning.